Now, we all remember the infamous clip that went around, it was a couple of years ago now, where we saw, of course, Rishi Sunak addressing a conservative audience down in the Midlands, basically in a very wealthy, affluent area indeed, saying, when we came in, we changed the funding formula so that all those areas that were, deprived and, maybe needed the money because, they are deprived, where they need those extra resources, they need that extra money. We're now going to divert it to the areas that really need it. You guys who don't really need it, who aren't really deprived, and are quite wealthy, affluent areas. This funding formula is something that has been in place apparently for a while. Rishi Sunak apparently, of course, blew the lid off that apparently when that all happened, and now Labour are going ahead trying to reorganize it. Now, the biggest problem is, how do you measure areas that need it versus don't? And unfortunately, this seems to be being played off by a lot of people as a urban versus rural scenario. Now, I am not going to say that a lot of rural areas do not need help. They do need help. The problem is that you have a lot of urban areas that need a awful lot of help, especially up in the north, where they have been ignored for so long, where they haven't had these this funding stuff. And eventually, I do believe there needs to be a rebalancing, that maybe we need to tax the south to level up the north. That's obviously not going to be a very popular idea for any government, because at that point you're going, okay, if you live in the south, we might have to tax you more because the north is not doing so well, and you guys have reaped a lot of the benefits just because of your geography. It might be something that isn't very popular, but there you go. But nevertheless, these funding changes are coming in. These are going to benefit a lot of councils, certainly in the north and in the Midlands. And one of the things that he's going to do is that some of these reform councils are going to, of course, get more money. Now, as we have been seen and following, it's not like they have been having a good time, even when they are, quote, battling waste, fraud, and abuse, when they haven't found any waste, fraud, and abuse. Not only that, but they are going through their own budgetary problems as well. We'll see how they deal, but trust me, even if they do suddenly get this uplift and increase of funding, uh, trust me, they ain't gonna do, or at least deal with it very well, because there is just a level of incompetence amongst these reform people where they don't know what they are doing with their job, or how really some of these departments should be run, or these areas should be sort of focused on. They would rather, as we've seen very recently, pay money to put up flags because somehow that's a good idea. Anyway, on into this. So before we do go on more into this story, please do, of course, remember to click on the like, share, and of course, subscribe button down below. There is, of course, as always, the Patreon page. There's a Buy Me Coffee link where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the YouTube membership, of course, down below. That up there is, of course, the QR code. That will take you straight, of course, to the Patreon page. So thank you very much to everyone who does help and support the channel. And of course, as always, thank you very much to everyone else. Even if you do just click the like and share button, it all helps. So let's crack on then into this then, shall we? So councils now in the north of England and Midlands to now get more funding in big shakeup. So deprived towns and cities in the Midlands and the north of England are now going to be big winners in the shakeup of local authority funding that will now redirect cash from more affluent rural areas to urban councils hit hardest by austerity. Now, a lot of people say this is what really should have happened. But there's a lot of people in these rural areas now that are going to go, well, what if this, leads to now deprivation in these rural areas? And it's hard not to argue that, but this is one of these things where not time will have to sell and what happens in here. This is the traditional, as we've always said, this urban versus rural, the cities versus the countryside, always this constant push and pull between the two. So ministers have said that now all these changes will be in place for a fairer system that recognises the extra needs of the weaker council tax raising powers of councils now in the so-called left behind areas. It would also guarantee now a real terms of funding increase now for the next 3 years. People living in these places have suffered mostly from austerity and will now finally see these areas turn around, local government minister Alistair McGovern said in a parliamentary statement. All these changes will, of course, be introduced from April before the critical local election in May, which could now see funding boosts for Reform UK-led councils in the north, high levels of deprivation, such as Durham, Lancashire, as well as Kent, Reform's very own flagship council. Now, are they going to be any better because of this? No. A lot of these reform shenanigans that we've been covering have been, well, they've been decisions of their own making. Hasn't even been, lack of funding or anything like this. The fact that now this is on the way, we'll be seeing, interestingly, to see if this plays into any of their budgetary decisions going forward in the next couple of months. But trust me, the hilarity of the incompetence of these Reform UK councillors will still continue to play out. I have no doubt. So don't think that they're suddenly going to change their minds or change their attitudes suddenly because they've got more funding. Oh no, we are probably going to see a bizarre focus in how this money should actually be spent, and why eventually some of that money might just be completely, absolutely wasted in this case, unfortunately, for many of those areas. So, back to this. Although now the precise council-by-council impact is, of course, still, of course, not yet available, sources do suggest that now the funding boost to at least over 20 million a year for Kent County Council would now allow it to meet its main political priority of setting a council tax increase rise of lower than 5% to warn solidly Labour-supporting heartlands in the north are seen as part of an aim to try and boost civic infrastructure in post-industrialised communities. The hope is to try and reverse the trend of growing distrust in politicians amongst voters who have now switched off their electoral allegiances to the Conservatives and even Reform in recent years. That will be, maybe that will be a reverse, who knows? It depends eventually what these civic infrastructure projects are, what this money is used with. If it's a Reform Council and they, I don't know, waste it or squander it, and then try and blame it on the national government, they should turn around and make sure it's, it's not, they don't want, not the ones getting the blame. It's these guys, the Reform Council, that decided to make this decision and funded this, and this, which basically ended up doing nothing for your local area. Don't blame us. Blame the ones who decided what to spend the money on. So McGovern went on to say, this is about trying to provide visible proof that the state can, of course, still improve people's lives and keep its promises. The journey, of course, will at times be very difficult, but the end result will now be a new role for councils now as agents of renewal, which, again, I think is very interesting that they're phrasing it like that. So analysis now of the model of the government's fair funding formula carried out by the Institute of Fiscal Studies back in summer unexpectedly found that, of course, some deprived areas such as Teesside, Sunderland, Gateshead and Wigan are, of course, set to lose out. But after now further tweaks, those areas are now expected to be beneficiaries. Steve Houchen, the chair of the Sigmona Group of urban councils, including Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester and Sheffield, and, of course, big part of Barnsley, Steve Houghton, remember that well, welcomed, of course, the changes. He said, of course, these reforms do mark a very significant step forward to a lot more fairer and more balanced funding system for councils across the country, he said. Settlement, of course, is not now as bad as feared for London's councils, who feared And at one stage, they were very concerned that they might lose billions of pounds worth of funding, and at 11th hour changed in the deprivation measures. They now recognised the capital's high levels of housing and the need for extra concentrated child poverty, mitigating now the impact now to some extent. Responding now very coolly to the announcement, the chair of London Council's, Chair Holland, warned that any spiralling financial pressures caused by the rising needs for services meant now under this new funding formula, half at least the capital's 32 boroughs would need the government at least bailouts to try and avoid going bankrupt by 2028. So again, this is the big problem that all councils are facing, that there are these continuing pressures, growing pressures on SEN, pressures on adult social care. This is because we are having an ever aging population. So the older more people get, guess what? You need more money for adult social care. There's been an increase in SEND. Why has there been an increase in SEND? Well, this was predicted very much so after the pandemic. A lot of kids have very much struggled because of that. So this is something that is going to be affecting a lot of kids for quite some time to come. So, of course, there is an increase in this. It is not parents trying to like fob one off over the state or something like that to that extent. So onto this, the County Councils Network, of course, did criticise the changes, saying that many, of course, its members in rural areas will, of course, set to lose out substantially. It called out the new formula very arbitrary and accused ministers now of caving into pressure from urban councils. But they're also in need of this. It's not that urban, rural councils aren't suffering these pressures either. They are. But urban councils suffering a lot more very acutely, more so from these problems, because again, they have a larger population than the rural areas. So they are seeing this rise hit them a lot more quicker than those rural areas. Is this something that will have to be addressed maybe in a couple of years' time? Absolutely. But the question is how? How do you start to balance these? Because it always goes back to the traditional, as we've said before, urban versus the rural areas. This is nothing new. This goes like all the way back to like Roman times, where you can see like city patricians and councillors etc. arguing for stuff, and the urban more rural like bishoprics, lordships, etc., arguing for other stuff. So this is nothing new. This is a story as old as time, but things are at least getting a little bit more complicated in how these things are, because we obviously provide a lot more services than we did back then. But this is not a new story. So they did continue. They said in response to this, our analysis does show that county and rural urban taxpayers are already now set to foot the bill for these reforms, with 33 of our councils already facing real term reduction in funding unless they increase their council tax by at least 5% per annum over the next 3 years. The CCN's financial spokesperson, Steve Bronner, said, Jeremy Newmark, the financial spokesperson for the District Councils Network, said, now, instead of delivering essential financial reform and fiscal devolution that are now really needed, the government now is merely reallocating, shall we say, an already inadequate funding pot, which again was what sort of the Tories did. But you have to remember, these people that are complaining about losing this money were in a position where they benefited from a conservative government that gave them more money while taking money away, because we saw the video from Rishi Sunak very clearly saying it, from those more deprived areas. So sometimes I can't help but feel that, they've been the ones who've been a beneficiary in some of these cases because of, a conservative government. And now they're like, oh, but we want our money too. But what about these urban areas? It's as we keep on saying, it's this constant push and pull between these two areas, rural versus urban. Anyway, he did go on to say, while it is, of course, quite legitimate for ministers to use areas as deprivation as a factor for determining services, it would, of course, be ironic and unfortunate and very counterproductive if this led to an increase in deprivation outside of the bigger cities. Well, we'll see. We'll see if that turns out to be true on that front. But needless to say, this is going to have a big impact, a very, very big impact on a lot of councils going forward. A lot of impact on councils going forward, especially in North Midlands. So while this not might feel immediate impact over time, this will have an impact. Just as austerity, you saw things gradually, slowly disappear, you might now see things start to slowly reappear over time. That's how these things work. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think, of course, about all this down below. And, of course, we'll see you all